Krista?
Yes.
So, the United States has had an unusually high number of school shootings in the past, especially in the past few years. And this has raised the question of how we should prepare against these attacks in the future. One of the presented solutions is to train and arm teachers with firearms so that they can be prepared in the case of a school shooting. Our current President, Donald Trump, alongside U.S. Secretary Betsy DeVos, have both been very open to this idea. However, I disagree with this proposal. Looking at the facts, arming teachers would cause more harm than do good. The reasons that support this include that armed civilians would make it harder to identify who is the shooter, that having a gun in the classroom would increase the chance of a school shooting, and the teachers are not appropriate candidates for handling and using firearms. My first reason is that arming civilians will make it harder to identify who is the shooter, and this could result in law enforcement getting confused and targeting the wrong person. This point is reinforced by Dallas Police Chief David Brown's statement. We don't know who the good guy is versus the bad guy when everyone starts shooting. An example of this confusion and its possible severe consequences was when Joe Zamudio, the armed civilian who was praised for helping take down a suspected shooter, confessed that if he had drawn his gun, he would have accidentally shot the innocent man who had taken the gun from the gunman. Similar problems would definitely occur if a school shooting with teachers holding guns would in that scenario, as law enforcement may get confused with who is the shooter and who is just an armed teacher, and would maybe even shoot or target the wrong person. The next reason that shows that arming teachers is not a good idea is that having a gun in the classroom would increase the chances of a school shooting. According to the meta-analysis by the Global Health Sciences of UC San Francisco, access to a firearm, irrespective of age, triples the risk of death by suicide and doubles the risk of death by homicide. According to the Journal of Trauma, guns kept in the home for self-protection are more often used to kill somebody you know than to kill in self-defense, 22 times more likely. These statistics show that the risks that come with access to a firearm in the home and the increased risk to children posed by the presence of a gun in homes suggests that guns in schools would have similar consequences. My third reason that I believe that teachers should not have guns is that they are not appropriate candidates for handling and using firearms. Many teachers have stated that they are not comfortable with the idea of carrying guns because their job is to teach and not to fight or kill. Teach Plus, which is a national advocacy group for teacher leadership, conducted a poll of 1,233 teachers and found that about 80% of them strongly oppose arming teachers in schools. Guns are a huge responsibility, and if teachers and schools are not comfortable with them, it is not a good idea to have them take on that responsibility and be liable. And unless if they were to go through the same extensive training as law enforcement, armed teachers would not be as capable as trained law enforcement and would end up being more of a safety risk rather than being a help. School security consultant Ken Trump expressed his disgust for the proposal of arming teachers, saying, "To think that providing teachers, principals, custodians, or other school staff with 8, 16, or even 60 hours of firearm training on firing, handling, and holstering a gun somehow makes a non-law enforcement officer suddenly qualified to provide public safety services is an insult to our highly trained police professionals and a high risk to the safety of students, teachers, and other school staff." In the case of an actual school shooting, there would be no way for teachers to be as highly trained and capable as actual law enforcement who already have made mistakes in the past, and would be more likely to misuse the gun and result in more casualties. All of these points serve to show that guns should not be in the classroom and that teachers should not be armed.
You don't have to stand. You go ahead and sit down, and I'll give you some comments in just a second. Okay, well, you do have a proposition at the beginning of the speech. I think you could highlight it a little bit more so we can distinguish it from the introductory material. But it basically comes down to arming teachers will do more harm than good. That's the claim that you're making. And like I said, I think you ought to single it out and make sure that people know that that's the proposition. There's a very clear preview statement of what the supporting points are going to be, so I think that that's effective. When you get to, and I think you give us a little bit of the controversy on this when you suggest that it's been talked about as a potential issue, that we have school shootings going on, so we know a little bit of the context for this argument. When you get to the main body of the speech, you signpost the first point pretty clearly. We know where you are on that argument. The data that you have on that particular point is a little bit, you've got a quote and an example. The example is a little complicated. I think that there's something there that wasn't explained as clearly as it needs to be. Your point, though, ultimately, I think, is relatively clear. It depends a lot on hypotheticals. Like I said, the one example that you have that's a practical one I thought was a little bit confusing. The rest of them are hypotheticals, and I think that they're reasonable hypotheticals under the circumstances. So that's fine. The second point, suggesting that there would be an increased chance of harms to students or increased chance of gun violence because of the presence of the gun. You use the statistics about home ownership of guns to apply to this situation or circumstance. I'm not sure that the inference that you're making there is going to be sound based on the reasoning. That'll be something that the refutation speaker will probably talk about. And the statistical correlation that you're talking about exists primarily because people who commit crimes do use guns, not so much because people decide to commit crimes because they have guns. That seems to be like an inverse relationship that's being presented there. And then on the last point, that it's not really appropriate, the fact that a lot of teachers reject that idea, I think that's okay. The criticism from other folks suggesting that the idea that anybody thinks that this would be equivalent to a law enforcement personnel, that's a reasonable argument to make, except, of course, that the question of the alternative is never discussed, and that's, I think, where the main weakness of the argument is going to be from the response speaker's point of view. It says the alternative is to wait for law enforcement to show up, and by then everybody's going to be dead. So that's going to be probably the main argument that comes from the response speaker. At the end of the speech, though, you shift your proposition and you turn it into a claim of policy twice. They shouldn't be in schools, and so we shouldn't be arming teachers. And those are policy claims. You should go back to your original claim. All right, thank you.